Okay, we're live, and this is Hillary Topper with We Are Triathletes. And welcome, guys. I'm really excited. I have Dr. Marc Taczanowski from True Sport Care on with us today, and he's going to talk about injury prevention. So without further ado, I'm going to put Marc on to tell you all about how to prevent all those injuries that we've been getting all season, right?
Well, thanks for having me. Once again, I enjoyed doing this kind of thing, and I think that we're kind of changing the world of sports medicine. We're teaching people a lot about how to interpret the signals of their body, and it's not just managing something when it happens. It's really more along the lines of getting to know when something is about to happen, and everybody has the ability to do so. So I'm going to teach them a little bit about that. One of the things that we talk about all the time is how does somebody know when they are prone to getting an injury or when they're going to develop an overuse type of syndrome. And we kind of ask them to use the tools that they're already employing, and that's going to be foam rolling, stretching, stick rolling, ball rolling, all those kind of things. Now, we don't tell people to not do stuff. We always say, do it, but understand why you're doing it and understand what it's accomplishing. So if somebody was to foam roll their left hamstring and then they foam rolled their right hamstring, or if they stretched both sides, both hamstrings, and they realize that they're either both very tight or extraordinarily tight compared to other athletes, other colleagues, then they know that something's not quite right, that something is a little bit off. Or if they say that there's an asymmetry between their left hamstring and their right hamstring, that's an immediate indication that something is not quite right. Now, most people will say, well, I just need to stretch that hamstring more. And unfortunately, that isn't going to be a permanent solution. It may give them temporary length in that hamstring, but that hamstring will always go back to being tight. Another thing that we kind of talk about these days is that if you look 20 years ago and you looked at the theories when it came to having a fever, then even with children, then immediately when a kid had a fever, the doctor would say, all right, go ahead and take a Tylenol. And nowadays they're saying that's not the best idea because we have to kind of accept what the body is trying to do. The body is a pretty smart machine. So if the body is raising its own core temperature in order to fend off bacteria or disease, we kind of have to let that happen within reasonable limits. If it gets to be too dangerously high, obviously we do something about it. But we're kind of employing that mentality in the sports medicine world as well. And we're saying, hey, listen, if the body is trying to create tightness somewhere, let's find out why it's creating that tightness, not fight it, but understand why it's happening and then try to manipulate it somehow. So from our perspective, once we have somebody who comes in complaining about tight hamstrings, we're going to say, is that muscle weak? Is that muscle tight and strong or tight and weak? If it's tight and weak, we teach somebody how to use their hamstrings better. If it's tight and strong, then somebody else in that chain, whether it be in the glutes, the calves, the low back, somebody else might not be as strong as they should be. And that's why that muscle is taking up a lot of that extra stress because it's doing more than it actually has to do. All right, so that's one of the things. Again, so when somebody, they always ask me, when should I stretch? When should I foam roll? When should I do that kind of stuff? And I go, you know, we recommend stretching in two scenarios only. One is when you're trying to return a muscle back to its normal resting length. So after somebody performs rigorous activity and they feel like they're kind of tight because the muscles are just really bound up, then yeah, you can go ahead and stretch the muscles, let them come back to their normal resting length. But if you ever try to increase muscle length with stretching, it doesn't work. 100% of the time, it does not work. The other way that you can use stretching is for analysis, like we just talked about. That's pretty much why I like for people to go ahead and use stretching. So that way when they come into me and they can give me great feedback, I can kind of be a sniper and I can go right to the problem area. Whereas I just say, well, I'm just coming in because whatever, this is bugging me, that's bugging me. You know, I want to know as much information as possible. All right, so that's another main thing that people can do in order to kind of stave off these injuries. Never accept the fact that something is tight and don't say, well, it's because my mom had tight hamstrings, therefore I must have tight hamstrings. I inherited that. You can inherit the patterns that are passed down from generation to generation, but there's nothing stating that you are relegated to suffer from having these tight structures. The body was not created the body was actually created to be fairly athletic, fairly coordinated. And if you feel like you don't have that, you're either stagnating in your progress, you see your kid may not necessarily look as coordinated as the rest of them, they may not have the muscle connections that everybody else has. and it's trainable. I mean, he may not get to be a Lionel Messi, like in the picture behind me, but he definitely has the potential to unlock more ability, more athletic ability within his own body.
So talk to us a little bit about that, Mark. I mean, well, let's take a step back, okay? So with triathletes, I mean, we are right now in full gear, right? We're training, we're putting in hours and hours a day of training. On our days off or recovery days, what do you suggest we do?
The biggest issue probably that I see with triathletes is that you guys are linear athletes. You guys move this way. You never move this way. So one of the cross-training recommendations that I have for triathletes is to move this way somehow. And that's going to be specifically, I'll talk about knee issues and hip issues and foot issues. So a lot of times you'll have the kinetic breakdown where somebody winds up becoming a quote-unquote overpronator. Then their knee starts to go towards the midline. When that happens, it increases the Q angle on the hip. So these are things that a lot of the triathletes have talked about with us. Now, there's a two-pronged approach to this. You have the podiatric approach, which is basically going to say, well, if you're pronating too much, let's make you not pronate by putting in a rigid orthotic, so that way your foot doesn't collapse, your knee doesn't go in, and your hip is happier. And you know what? It works. The problem with it is that it works. So in our point of view, from a therapeutic point of view, what can you do? You want to try to create as much muscular control inside that foot as possible, so that way the foot doesn't collapse. The foot is designed to move. So when we stick a rigid orthotic in a foot that's designed to move, and now the foot is not moving anymore, then the pain may go away, but now the body's not moving the way that it should. I kind of use the flat tire analogy. So how can we fix a flat tire? Can we get the patch fixed, the hole fixed, so that way we pump up the air and that way it's moving again? Or can we take a jack and jack up the car, so now the tire no longer looks flat? We've made it, we've patched the problem, but now the car can't move. The car is not going to be a functional unit because, again, you've made it look like the tire's not flat, but yet you haven't fixed the real reason as to why it's happening. So if we can get good muscular control in that foot, if we can get the hip side stabilizers moving very well and appropriately, then you're going to have good stability there. The knee will track perfectly. Your foot won't overpronate. So we do more of a top-down approach rather than the podiatric down-up approach.
You talked a little bit about listening to your body's clues, right? So if, you feel a little bit of a ting or something when you're running or when you're cycling, you maybe feel something in your hip, whatever. How do you know when it's time just to stop or keep pushing right through it? Because I think a lot of us just push right through it.
Sure. That's a tough call. One of the things that I would like to absolutely mention is that when somebody takes any kind of anti-inflammatory medication prior to, almost prophylactically, think about, again, what it's doing. I'm not saying do or don't. I'm just saying think about what it's doing. It is controlling some inflammation. So inflammation is kind of like a warning light in the body. So if you are experiencing inflammation somewhere and you're taking a med that's going to make that a little bit more tolerable, you may not be as aware of something happening. So my analogy is that you're dimming your warning lights. I'm a big fan of comfort, so I'm a big fan of taking meds afterwards. If you say, man, my knees are really killing me, I can't function, I want to take something so I can get through the day, yeah, I'm all for it. But taking something prophylactically, not a big fan of that. But what do you do when you experience pain when you're actually on a run, bike, or a swim? The general guideline that we use is, if you feel, let's say the pain level that you feel when something happens is a 3, and then you may try to change your gait, you may try to go a little bit faster, a little bit slower, you may try to stretch out, and then you kind of go again. If that pain level stays at a 3 or it increases at all, it's probably time to shut down. If you are able to make that pain diminish, now the people are going to argue, well, there's an endorphin release, so that might be why the pain is diminishing, but either way, it's safe if your pain either diminishes or, not even stays the same. But if it drops by just a hair, then it's safe to essentially continue. But again, don't, after the run, if you go, yeah, my pain pretty much went away after the run, it doesn't mean don't investigate why it happened in the first place, especially if it happens on a couple of subsequent training days. So it means that the body's trying to tell you something. Hey, listen, you need to address this. There's some kind of an imbalance somewhere. With that, I'd like to actually also mention one of the things that I say all the time with our patients is that overuse is a big term that's being used, being thrown around with all of our athletes, specifically distance athletes. So triathlon is one of those particular activities. We don't believe in overuse. In the office, I talk about it all the time, and I go, there's no such thing as an overuse unless there's an underuse somewhere. So I call them underuse syndromes rather than overuse syndromes, because again, if you take the overused muscle and you beat it up and you do all the things that you normally would do to make that feel better, again, icing, rolling, Voltaren, all this topical stuff, that overused muscle, there's a reason why it's overused. And really the main reason why it's overused is because there is an underuse somewhere else. If all of the muscles are working properly and the load is split evenly amongst all those muscles, none of them should technically be overused. If you believe you have an overuse, you should ask yourself this question. All right, I just ran a marathon and my left knee is really killing me. It must be an overuse. Then did your right knee do the same amount of volume as your left knee? And if it did, how come it didn't have the overuse? So that's something that you can kind of ask yourself. If you have an overuse, why wouldn't it be both sides?
So then in that case, what do you do?
With an overuse or with an underuse, as we say?
Exactly.
Have to investigate why there is an underuse in the first place. So typically, let's say, very, very common thing that we see is somebody's going to come in to the office, they complain, oh, I have really tight hamstrings, or actually something that's even more common than a plantar fasciitis or an Achilles tendinosis. These are very, very common injuries amongst triathletes. So if you went to the traditional route with a plantar fasciitis, they would say take a golf ball, roll it on your foot, ice bottle, stretch your calves, so on and so forth. So that's pretty much a symptom-driven treatment. So they're looking at the area where the symptoms are. And oftentimes the problem comes from an area that is nowhere near where the symptoms actually are. So in my brain, what happens is that plantar fasciitis comes into the office. Then I'm going to check posterior chain muscles, which is going to include glutes, hamstrings, calves, popliteus, believe it or not, little muscle, short toe flexors, long toe flexors, opposite leg hip flexors, because the scissoring action of both legs is basically how we run. And then I'm going to find which one of those muscles tests weak. When the muscle tests weak, then I'm going to say, well, your calf usually is going to be the facilitator or the muscle that's doing too much, which is making the calf tight, and that's why you're experiencing that pull on the plantar fascia. So yes, there is a tight calf, but I got to find out why it's tight. Is it tight because other muscles aren't doing their job, or is it tight because it's not doing its job? Either way, somebody's not doing its job, and we got to find out how. And that's done through the muscle testing that we do in the office. It's pretty simple stuff. And then we give exercises in order to reprogram how the brain is using the body. And as you know, based on your experience in the office, it's not like traditional therapy, which takes months in order to have an effect. This literally, week to week, you feel like you're using a different instrument. So if we are picking the right combination of muscles to give somebody, within a week, typically the problem is either gone or close to gone.
Well, okay, I think, and I agree, it's awesome. But what about for somebody who lives out of state, who can't get to your office? I mean, do you have some accommodations? I mean, we are triathletes from all over the place. Talk to us about that and how you can help people anywhere.
So good that you asked. So what we wound up doing, and I've done this with some of the Olympic folks that I've worked with, they had contacted me in the off season. They said, hey, Mark, from working with you, is there anything that you can do with us, online? I said, hey, let's start a Skype session. Let's see pretty much what we can do. And as we were doing that, I was watching them move on Skype. And then I was having them go through some of the exercises that we prescribe, asking them where they feel it. And with having a very keen eye, even with, how it degrades on video throughout the web and stuff, I can pretty much pick out the cheats, or I can say, do you feel it here? Do you feel it there? Is this muscle helping? Is that muscle helping? Because we have kind of like an all-star list of the usual suspects of which muscles might be trying to cheat for the weak structure. So as I watch somebody move and have them go through some movement patterns essentially on video, I can pick these things out, and from doing that I can say, all right, now you pretty much go to our YouTube page, YouTube channel, and you're going to be doing this exercise, and this exercise. So you start with that and you see pretty much what happens. Also, to give you an indication of why I think this can potentially be very successful, is that we were contacted by a lady in Ohio, and she sent me an email based on my YouTube videos, and she said, hey, I want to thank you. I'm not a patient, I don't know you, but I came across your videos. I've been doing physical therapy for quite a while, and I haven't been getting a lot of benefit, but then through your videos, I've been being very specific about how I'm doing my rehabilitation exercise. And she goes, I'm getting so much more out of it because I have more of a mind-muscle connection. And that really is something that we promote greatly, is that if you're doing any kind of a traditional exercise, even if you're doing a glute bridge, which is what they may recommend for a plantar fascia, you can derive the strength, or you can make a perfectly good looking glute bridge without using your glutes at all. You can use your hamstrings and you can use your low back. If you did a glute bridge and you said, wow, I really feel my glutes getting charged up, or them doing the work, guess what? It's a glute bridge, so you're probably doing fine. But it's a matter of being conscious of where the effort is coming from, which is going to give you that rehabilitative quality that we're looking for.
Talk to us a little bit about your YouTube channel, because, you know, as I went to see you in the office, you showed me there were different videos that explained the different exercises that you give out. Can you talk a little bit about that and, how you use those?
Sure. Yeah, so every athlete that comes through the door, essentially, if they don't have a major complaint, even if they do have a major complaint, we pretty much say, all right, what type of athlete are you? You're either an upper extremity athlete, a lower extremity athlete, or you use both. Like in triathlon, for swimming specifically, you're going to be using the upper and lower. So what's probably the most important muscle in the body? Everybody should say it's your core, and that really is the answer. So we check core first. If the core is functioning properly, then maybe we'll go down into the glutes and the hip flexors and the rotators of the hips and the hamstrings, or we'll go up into the upper extremity, check the pecs, the lats, the rotators of the shoulder. So that's pretty much how we go through the body, muscle by muscle. And as soon as we get our threshold of 2 or 3 muscles, and I kind of gauge based on the patient, I kind of try to look into their eyes and go, are you going to be a compliant patient, or are you going to be a pain in the butt patient? So if they're going to be a compliant patient, I might give them 3 exercises to do. If they're going to not do anything that I ask them to do, I might just give them 1 muscle. But that's one thing that I got to say is great about the triathlete demographic, is that you guys love structure. You love to have everything laid out. All right, Monday, I have my 3.7 hour run, so you're literally going like nuts when it comes to structure. And this stuff that I give you is more structure. So I'm going to say you're going to do 6 sets of 30-second holds per day of these 2 muscles on each side. You have to do it prior to your actual training, and it plays into your training. With that being said, think about this. So when we're done with somebody, we create a tailored workout program, or tailored warm-up program, better word, for somebody's training. So if you know that your glutes and your hamstrings don't perform well, and it's Monday morning and you're like, oh, I'm going out for my run, then your glutes and your hamstrings most likely won't participate as much as they could during your run. So now that we've explained to you and we've made you aware, my glutes and hamstrings don't work very well, all you have to do is prime them with the exercises that I give you the day that you're training. And as soon as you prime them and then you go out and run, those muscles will be much more likely to participate. So you're kind of rehabbing yourself by doing just these little priming drills that we show you.
Now, I also work with a group of beginner runners, right? We have a Galloway run group. What would you suggest for these new runners? I mean, these are people who have been on the couch most of their lives and now are first going out and running. How do you prevent injury for people like that?
Well, it's funny because my triathlon history is I did it for a couple of years. I did it mostly because I wanted to try to empathize with a lot of our patients. I went from being terrible to being just a little bit less terrible, and I actually never really enjoyed the training. But when I remember training for a 5K, I wound up getting a stress fracture in my foot, and I wound up being in one of those boots for about 21 weeks. So I remember having my injuries from from overtraining. And I don't know if overtraining is the right word, but when somebody's going from being, let's say, a couch potato to now being a triathlete, the one thing that they think is going to work is all or nothing principle. They're like, well, let me just get out there and run. And they feel like if they don't do that, then they're either failing or they're going to slip back into their couch potato ways. And that's not necessarily the case. Hal Higdon, familiar with him and all of his training programs that he puts out for runners, what he has been doing over the course of the last probably 15 years is that he's reducing the weekly volumes, but he's actually keeping like long runs pretty much the same because he's trying to help people save them from overuse injuries. Whenever I would do talks for running groups, I would always say, listen, if you have your training schedule laid out and you miss a day for whatever reason, life gets in the way, you're not feeling great, kid is sick, if you miss that day, then it's missed. Forget about it. Don't try to tack it on to the next week, because if you're going to err on the side of overtraining or undertraining, we see, I'd say, probably the largest percentage of patients or athletes who do better than they expect are the people who undertrain. The people who do poorer than expected are the ones who overtrain. So I say, if you miss a day, you just miss it. You know, if you're not feeling it, then you can try to push through. But if you're really not feeling it, then you got to shut down. Overtraining is one of those things we see all the time. And the biggest indicator of overtraining is a performance drop off. You know, so you got to really, really watch that.
So talk to us a little bit about your Olympic experience. You have some really cool experiences, and I'd love you to share that with everyone.
I specifically, when we opened the office with my wife back in 2004, we were walking around to different businesses and just introducing ourselves and asking for advice for a new business. And one gentleman who wound up befriending us wound up asking us, yeah, if you want some advice, then tell me why I should come to you. And what makes you different? And nothing at the time really made us different. So she and I decided to investigate further as far as postdoctorate training that we can do. And we learned about a sports program that we enrolled in the following year. And the first instructor that we had was Philip Santiago, who was the first chiropractor ever to get invited to an Olympic event, which was, I believe, 1992, Barcelona. And I looked at my wife and I said, I didn't know that chiropractors can do that. So I said, I think I want to learn. I want to do what it takes in order to be able to do this. So that was 2005. And then I started investigating through the USOC volunteer program, medical volunteer program, what needs to be done. And you had to work with a sports team for 5 years. You had to have certain certifications and criteria under your belt in order for you to pass muster, just to be involved in the application process. So I did what I needed to do. And about 4 years later, I had applied and they had accepted me into the program. So I went to Chula Vista, California, and I worked with a number of different teams, a lot from track and field. Paralympic soccer was there at the time. We had BMX that was there at the time. And after working with the athletes for 2 weeks, you essentially get evaluated. And the medical staff will say, you either are satisfactory, you can continue on in the system, or, thank you for your service, and we'll call you if we need you. So I got a call basically later that year, and they said, hey, the training center in Lake Placid is in need of coverage because the chiropractor who's there is traveling to, I believe, the Pan Am Games or something like that, and they need somebody staffing it. And I said, I'd be glad to go. So I went there, and that's when I met a lot of Winter Olympians, including luge, bobsled, skeleton, etc. And for whatever reason, I guess because I'm a bigger guy and the bobsled people are bigger people, I started doing my thing with them, wrestling with them and showing them some exercises. And they really liked my services. So that's when they spoke to the medical director and they said, listen, this is the guy that we want coming with us now for each of our important events, world championships. So I went with them the following year. I came back to Lake Placid because world championships were there. Then the following year, I went to St. Moritz, Switzerland with them because that's where world championships were. And then the following year, the world championships are essentially the Olympics because there is no official world championship. So that's when I went with the team to Sochi, Russia in 2014. And again, when you're there, you are working with your team, but you essentially work with anybody who comes into the satellite medical office. So I worked with snowboarders, I worked with cross-country skiers, ski jumpers, you name it. I pretty much worked with those folks when I was there. So great experience.
So let me ask you something.
Sure.
How different was it working with those people as opposed to amateur athletes or triathletes?
So if a gold medalist says, hey, listen, can you just grasp in my left elbow? Then I probably would say whatever you like, because he's been through sports med for a very, very long time. I may have my own opinions as to why his elbow is bugging him in the first place, and I may say, hey, try these exercises and it may get rid of your symptoms, but I'm not going to necessarily question what has already worked for him. People who are kind of new sports rookies, triathlon rookies, they don't have the best grasp on sports medicine, what can be done, what they need to do themselves, how to modify stuff, how to do recovery. So I do a lot more education when it comes to the rookies. And I also try to let them know more so what the treatments are doing for them. Rather than just doing the treatments and saying, hey, listen, you feel better. Yeah, it was all me that did that. I'm going to say, I just beat the crap out of this muscle. So now it's calmed down and it's going to stay calm for about a week, but you have to do these exercises because you have to change how you're using your body. That's essentially the main difference. I won't go into such detail with the Olympians or with the professional athletes, but with the rookies, I kind of want them to know as much as possible, because I don't want them to have to rely on me. And that's the biggest difference too. In the Olympic world, when somebody's a gold medalist, he can have this therapist stretching his left leg, and he can have a different therapist stretching his right leg because he likes his right leg stretching better. In this kind of world, you guys don't always have sports medicine support with you. So if you learn how to treat things yourself, or why things are happening and how to prevent them from happening, that's so much more valuable for you guys. So we don't like to have perpetual patients if we can avoid them.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about True Sport Care and how people can get in touch with you.
Sure. So True Sport Care is located at 62 Lake Avenue South in Wisconsin. Zip code is 11767. The phone number here is 631-584-8783 or 584-TRUE. That worked out pretty well when we originally got the number. Website is www.truesportcare.com. It's not True Sports Care, it's just True Sport Care. And they can email me at truesportcare@gmail.com. Yeah, we accept new patients. I mean, not to brag or boast or anything, but we have people that travel down from Westchester to see this kind of stuff because it is unique, it's different, it's not necessarily the same stuff. I know what traditional offices do, whether it be physical therapy offices, whether it be chiropractic offices. There's a lot of range of the quality of services that people will get, and that's in any business. So I'm not necessarily disparaging our business, but I do know that it's very traditional that in a chiropractic office you get heat, stim, crack, heat, stim, crack. And that to me essentially is garbage. I don't mean to sound passionate about it, but that really kind of bugs me when somebody does that and they're doing that for months and months and months, and the patient maybe will get better after 6 months, but I don't know if it's just the time that elapsed that got the patient better, or if it's that same heat, stim, and crack that somebody was doing 3 times a week forever. And then physical therapy is similar. They may get heat, stim, and hey, jump on that machine for a little while. But we're super nitpicky about the types of treatments that we do. We're nitpicky about watching the patients, making sure the patients are feeling it in the right spot. We never multitask, in the office. It's the one-on-one, doctor on patient for a half an hour or an hour, depending on the time slot. And it literally is. It's basically going to be undivided attention for that entire time. And that's something that's rare too, I think, in the healthcare world, is that you don't see a lot of that anymore. Everybody's kind of getting assembly lined now, so it's different stages. So you'll have a person on therapy, person on a machine, so you can work on 5 people at a time. And it might be good for revenue, but I think it's terrible for patient care.
I 100% agree with you. And I think the other thing I want to reiterate is that Dr. Marc and the whole group at True Sport Care works with athletes all over the world. So you can just check them out at truesportcare.com. Any final words, Marc, before we part?
Yeah, I want for all of the athletes that are seeking care from anybody to be as inquisitive as possible. Never let the treatment just happen without trying to understand what the treatment is doing. So that way, if you press your therapist, if you press your chiropractor, if you press them for information, they should be very willing to explain to you the mechanism of what it's doing and what they're trying to accomplish. And if they don't do that, I think you should seek out more. I think it's important for patients to understand what's happening to them. So that's basically my one takeaway.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And
Thanks for having me.
appreciate you being here with us. That's Dr. Marc at TrueSportCare.com. And this is Hillary Topper with We Are Triathletes, and I'm signing out. Thanks for listening in.
All right. Thank you.